Hey guys, and welcome to 40 Days and 40 Nights of Rain. I honestly have no idea what this game is about. I am going in completely blind. But, yeah, it's a visual novel and it looks really cute, so let's start. The Tinplate soldier has a dream. I like the art style already. The dream of rain and war never ends. Oh no, I'm gonna cry to this, aren't I? Oh no. I'm gonna cry. Yeah, yep, definitely gonna cry. The stench of gunpowder smoke blew by on the wind, teasing his face. Freezing raindrops ran down his cheeks. The distant sound of violent bombings rose, overlapping with the dry noise of machine gun fire. The street was dyed in ashen gray. Anything and everything was tainted, reflecting in his eyes. There was a thunderous roar of hurried anti-aircraft fire, and then an interval of silence. The explosion of a fighter plane resounded as it flew, skimming low over the ground. The shadow of a corpse in a trench was hidden. The shapeless form of an enemy peered out. The man's instinct, his eyes and nose, informed him that an enemy was approaching. There was a thunderous explosion. Just then, an ally on his right side jumped as his head exploded. There was a force like a downpour as metal bullets simultaneously hit their targets. Fragments of skull and brain matter splattered on the man's cheek with a wet sound. He wiped it off expressionlessly, like a machine, facing forward and firing at the enemy in front of him. He changed out the magazine of his rifle and pulled the trigger, shooting until the barrel became hot. He performed no more than those actions, still like a machine, over and over. A crack in the rubble moved as the shadow of an enemy soldier faced him. The moment he felt it, the other soldier was still young. His body was smaller, perhaps a juvenile warrior. They simultaneously gulped a breath and pulled their triggers. The gray field of vision scattered into deep crimson. The young soldier was shot in the head, and he convulsed and collapsed to the ground. Bits of his skull and brain splattered from his head, and already the prototype was finished off. Several minutes passed, and the number of corpses increased. Emotionlessly, he confirmed the situation, and then again breathed a heavy sigh. He continued to pull the trigger. Strong rain began to fall. Ah, this is so sad already. Especially because almost every single man in my family has been in the military. A flapping sound woke him up as a pigeon flew by, or above. He lazily shifted his gaze as it hung in the air. Several gray feathers, all the same color, fell from the sky. They loosely twirled and at length landed on the stone plaza. At the same time, a freezing raindrop dripped onto his cheek. Shaking his just awoken head, the man sighed deeply. As usual, the town plaza was deserted. On a nearby bench, an old woman fed a pigeon. This same old avenue, a gloomy look spread over his face as he sank into silence. The old woman had a heavily wrinkled face. The pigeons cooed as they scrambled for the scraps of bread. Again, he shook his head lightly and closed his eyes, thinking about the dream he'd just had. He'd had a dream that had reeked of rain and gunpowder smoke. And blood and guts. After a while, he closed his unchanging eyes. At length, the man rose, beginning to walk somewhere. He unfurled his expectedly bothersome umbrella against the weak rain. It fell without any sign of stopping. A truce had been settled settled on 10 days ago. Since then, soldiers had relished the peace. A man, who had no relatives, walked along the rustic highway heading towards an inn. During the previous war, he'd lost one finger on his left hand from an enemy plane's machine gun fire. However, since the battles had begun again, he'd returned to the front line, despite others' thoughts that it was reckless. Well, in his situation with no family, he probably feels like he has nothing left to lose. The small town seemed to be silently sleeping. Now they'd evacuated all the residents. The soldiers were living in this imitation environment. The town was quiet, like a ruin, and time flowed through this quiet calm. The rain fell on the everyday war, continuing without change. The man went on, continuing to walk on the stone pavement of the road. The inn would keep out the rain. Under the roof, his fellow soldiers gulped down alcohol, causing a ruckus during the day. His anxiety grew at not knowing whether the never-ending war situation had grown worse. He shouldn't feel uneasy, but they drowned themselves in liquor. They cheerfully raised their bottles, revealing scars from vicious burns. The man watched from nearby, touching the hollow place where his thumb had been. They returned to the liquor again and again, causing an uproar in this lifeless somewhere. He didn't join their group, instead, completely ignoring them. As the time passed, he was he was teased for not drinking, and he clucked his tongue in irritation. But the innkeeper would sometimes say something about the people she'd seen. They were all annoying, and thus many of them left town. The rain thundered onto the quiet street. He tried to think of a way to pass the time besides endlessly walking. If he slept, he'd dream of the battlefield. He wanted to avoid that by all means. There had been effects from the long spell of rain, including the ruins of the inhabited town, or uninhabited town, and bless you, babe. Stop ruining my recordings! Especially because this is a sad one. Nevertheless, unexpectedly, the sound of his footsteps and the sound of someone else's footsteps seemed to overlap. He unintentionally stopped walking, trying to verify whether or not he'd misheard. He heard the tiny, tiny sound of footsteps. Realizing it was the sound of someone else, the man slowly lowered his gaze. A little girl walked along the surface of the damp road. Her long white hair seemed to glow. Whoever she was, her desperate face was turned upwards as she walked. The rain poured from the clouds beyond, and it seemed that that was what she was looking at. She was looking at the sky. The moment he thought that, she fell down. Unintentionally, the man stood in mute amazement. The girl crouched on the stone pavement, as if enduring a sharp pain. On the other hand, as if young for a fleeting moment, he got a feeling of a strong will as he looked at her back. At length, the girl stood up again as though she'd been shot. Again, the same way, she began to walk away. She began to walk while looking at that sky, and suddenly fell again. Her small body struck the stone pavement. Slowly, her white hair gently fluttered down. He observed the scene, pondering whether his leg would inconvenience him. This town had many returning frontline soldiers, and it was not unusual for their limbs to be a hindrance. But the battlefield had nothing to do with this girl. Again, the person began to walk and immediately tumbled to the ground. Spontaneously, he reached out his hand halfway. The water bounced weakly off the stone pavement and the sound echoed. Noticing his footsteps, the little girl unexpectedly raised her head. "Hello, dear." Blue eyes, Agreeable eyes. He unintentionally gulped a breath. Her clear eyes were the same color as the cloudless sky, but that didn't surprise him. Who are you? She spoke. Her voice quavered, a voice shaking with tears. Many tears fell from this little girl's eyes as she asked, Are you... Whoops. Are you alright? What? You fell down. Uh, yeah, I'm alright, I'm sorry. As she spoke, the confused girl stood up. Her small hand gripped the wet cloth of his sleeve, lowering her head as she faced the man. Judging from appearances, she didn't seem to be hurt. Perhaps she'd bruised herself. If you were crying, I doubt you're really alright. No, it's okay. It's... The girl's voice was now remarkably tiny. She rubbed the traces of her tears, trying somehow to smile. She failed again and again, and then forced herself to laugh, albeit sadly. That's not it. The little girl smiled tearfully, and the man looked down at her expressionlessly. Changing the subject, he asked again, Where do you live, kid? What? Where do you live? You'll catch a cold if you stay wet like that. I... Suddenly she looked down. Chewing her lips, she seemed to steadily ponder something as she narrowed her eyes. Tears gathered in her sky-blue eyes. They spilled over, slowly slipping down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, she murmured as they dripped down. The relentless sound of the rain continued. With that, the girl closed her mouth. Perhaps she was an orphan of war, thought the man. Nevertheless, the little girl seemed detached from this sad, diverse world. She didn't know her circumstances, but it seemed... Or he didn't know her circumstances, but it seemed unnecessary to get her to tell him. On that note, the girl looked down at her feet and turned around, and the man began to walk away. After he'd walked for a moment, he suddenly stopped and glanced over his shoulders. Behind him, the girl was standing stock still. The girl who waited and the man who'd left. Neither walked, and both simply stopped. Her blue eyes seemed to be looking at something far away, and he gazed at her. He sighed and turned back. He spoke to the girl as she stood still. Is your stomach empty? My stomach? If you're hungry, come with me. With those words, he began to walk. Behind him, in the space he'd just left, he heard hasty footsteps, and then her small shoes, splashing in the puddles as she ran. She walked beside him, vigorously falling. Ah, welcome. Silence fell as they opened the front door of the inn. The landlady, who was busily going about her work, as were the lively customers, all fell silent as if struck by water. Their glances sharpened at his companion, the little girl. The next instant, there was a sudden uproar. Hey, hey, who's the kid? She's completely soaked, ain't she? Why'd you bring that girl in here, Tinplate? What were you thinking? Raising an eyebrow at the noise, the man crossed the room. Silence fell as he sat at the counter. And just then, the landlady brought a towel, rubbing the girl's head. She unconcernedly looked up as she was briskly scrubbed. After she finished carefully wiping, people again shook their heads in displeasure. That's no good. She should lend her clothes to change into. Well, you kid, where are you from? I don't know. You probably brought her 'cause she was soaking wet. Or so you say. Aren't you gonna answer us? She's not a little dog. Where are you from, miss? Well, he's Tinplate, but I didn't catch your name. Completely drunk, the red-faced man tilted the bottle, laughing heartily. Again the girl looked around a little, shaking her head as she asked, Tinplate? Yeah, that's that guy's nickname. He never laughs, he never cries, and he never gets mad. It's like he's got no heart, that sort of thing. You didn't know that, miss? The story of the heartless tinplate soldier. The little girl quietly turned around. She fixed her eyes on the man behind her who'd brought her here, quietly murmuring, "Heart." "Yeah, he doesn't. What you said, kid. Come on, sit down, sit down." Confusedly, the girl tried to climb up onto the tall chair, but appeared to have trouble. The surrounding soldiers called approvingly, "Cute!" The little girl's face flushed a deep red as a dish of hot stew was placed in front of her. She noticed that before the man was placed an identical bowl. With somewhat mechanical movements, the man began to eat his stew. The little girl watched this and started to copy him. Separately, it didn't cool their mouths, or her, it didn't cool in her mouth, and she grimaced at the heat, or as the heat hit her face. She tried again, this time slowly and carefully cooling it before eating. She unintentionally murmured this delightfully, smiling at the innkeeper. Then she looked at the man, who, in contrast, smiled bitterly as if amazed. The girl quietly finished eating. Inside the shop, shouts of acclamation were received. The young, charming little girl was an unusual sight in this town of many soldiers and aged people. In the shop, the landlady chose some child-sized clothing, narrowing her eyes at the girl's figure. "You're certainly not a very cute child, are you? Do you even know anyone around here?" The man didn't answer the teasing voice. He wasn't concerned about something like this. She whispered quietly to him, "I'm relieved, though. Even you can be human sometimes, huh?" Not waiting for his reply, she kept walking toward the little girl. Oh wait, that was the innkeeper, my bad. She sat at the head of the counter, and the man turned towards the stairs. The room they'd be lodging in, was on the second floor of the inn. As he turned to look over his shoulder, the man raised his eyes as they met with the little girl's. Without saying anything, the man left the dining hall. Rain continued to fall from the dark gray sky. The man leaned against the window, picking up his gun in one hand. He was accustomed to its weight. It was like a familiar part of his arm. The gun stock hit his right cheek. The butt fit snugly in the hollow on his right shoulder. His index finger nudged the trigger. His remaining fingers tightly grasped the stock. He let out a deep breath. That moment, a shriek rang out behind him. He lowered the gun when he realized it was a familiar voice. The little girl stumbled through the door, sitting in front of it. She was wearing new clothes, and the man with the gun stared in blank amazement. Taken aback at her returned appearance, the gun shook in his hands as he spoke in confusion. Uh, miss? But this room. I'm sorry." "No, I wasn't surprised or anything." Apologizing, he shook the gun to its original position. Still, though, the girl continued to sit. Saying nothing, she stared at the man reflected in her sky-blue eyes. Finally, she spoke in a hesitant voice, her expression changing to one full of determination. "Please, I have a request." "What?" "I hope I'm not bothering you. I'll sleep on the floor. Think nothing of it. It's okay. So could you lend me the corner of this room?" The man raised an eyebrow at the sudden favor. He stared at her, her eyes serious, almost desperate. For what reason? The man quietly asked her, and yet the answer in his heart had already been decided. Because she had no home. Because she'd been separated from her parents, he didn't mind anything. From the start, there was never anything in this room. The number of homeless little girls would grow, and he wouldn't care. But she gave an unexpected answer. "I want to see it." "See what?" That moment the girl's eyes were very clear. As if praying hard, she answered, "This world. I want to see this world. So spoke the little girl. This town is good to start with. So spoke the little girl. But I can't go everywhere by myself. She muttered this in a small voice. I want to at least see this town. She spoke with a laugh. Completely, anything and everything was surely impossible. But I am all out of time for this episode, guys. This is a really sad game. I thought it was going to be cute, but I guess not. I should have known from the title. Oh well, the art style was cute, so that's why I thought. Anyways, if you liked it, please give it a big thumbs up down below, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye!